Christian parenting.
Welcome to the Living Wholehearted podcast. We are Jeff and Terra Matson, a husband and wife team who is shrinking the integrity gap in our own lives and helping others do the same. I'm a leadership and organizational development coach, and Terra is a licensed marriage and family therapist.
We believe that if you have a following, you are a leader, and how you lead matters. Whether you are leading in the home, work, or community, we are bringing you biblical, clinical, and relational wisdom to help you in every relationship that matters most to you. None of us do this perfectly, but we are leaning into the reality of our humanity and profound wisdom of grace. Talking about understanding and healing trauma and triggers. Jeff and I believe that trauma plays a huge role in a lot of maladaptive coping strategies, toxic faith. And at Living Wholehearted, our work for 20 years has been with leaders, revealing that most leaders have a past history of trauma of some sort. Healthy, wholehearted leaders are those who've actually named that trauma and have worked through their stories, working through even the toxic leaders that they've experienced, maybe even in their own homes. And having unresolved trauma and not dealing with our stories leaves us leaking all over our wake of influence.
We want to clarify that what we mean by a leader. We believe that if you have a following, you're a leader, and how you live and lead matters. The role of leadership is one thing, and we definitely specialize in high-capacity C-suite leaders. However, parenting is a leadership role as well, a critical role. Being on social media is a leadership role. We have to start thinking more holistically about leadership and the way that people are watching who we are, what we say, what we do. Shrinking the gap between what we preach and how we live is deeply connected to knowing and grieving our stories, which is some of what we help leaders of all types do so that now they can stop the generational pain and create a new legacy of trust, safety, and grace. So whether you're a person of faith or not, or maybe you're both, a parent trying to heal from your past so that you can shift the trajectory of your family, or you identify as a high-capacity leader and want to grow, we are so glad you're here for this conversation.
We have one of our favorite guests, Dr. Michelle. She's not only a friend, but she's a pioneer in the trauma world, specifically her passion around fathers and daughters. We wanted to have a dialogue that might center around triggers and trauma. So Dr. Michelle Watson Canfield is a national speaker, author, licensed professional counselor of 27 years, and she's the founder of the ABBA Project, which is a 9-month group forum for dads whose daughters are in their teens and their 20s. She writes great articles, she writes guest articles regularly for journals, magazines, as well as her own bi-monthly father-daughter blog. It's been interviewed on a wide variety of radios and television programs. And she's written, "Dad, here's what I really need from you, a guide for connecting with your daughter's heart. And let's talk conversation starters for dads and daughters." And she just had a new release done in Spanish, which is so exciting. She's also written contributing chapters in Father's Seds and How to Disciple Men.
Dr. Michelle's the radio podcast host of The Dad Whisperer and The Dad Whisperer podcast, which is available on her website and Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. She also co-chairs the Father-Daughter Initiative at the National Center for Fathering with her husband, Dr. Ken Canfield. And as a native to Portland, Oregon, she now resides near their tribe of 24, which includes 5 children, 3 son-in-laws, 2 daughter-in-laws, and 16 grandkids. This is the longest introduction ever, but it's well-deserved because we know her so much and love her so much. Dr. Michelle, great to have you with us today.
Oh my goodness. You guys are family to me. We are grafted in family. I adore your daughters, and I want everyone listening to know I have vetted these two since, oh my goodness, you were newly married, before you had kids, and these people walk their talk, and I respect them. They are my top tier referrals for counseling. And I'm telling you, anything they say, people, it's worth listening to because these are the real deal. And I love you both so much.
Thank you. So good. Okay. So we're going to dive in. let's just start with defining trauma. It's such a trigger, not a trigger word, but a trendy word right now. And the three of us have been doing this work for a really long time, but a lot of people throw it around and don't really know what it means. So let's start with your definition. How do you explain trauma to your clients and audiences?
You know, the best way to say it is that trauma is something that happens to you that's too much. It's too much for you to handle. And the APA, which is the American Psychological Association, their definition, listen to this. It's, again, a very easy one to understand, is just an emotional response to a terrible event. And really, what trauma is it's something that happens that usually shocks your system. That emotional response you have to something that is too much, too big, too intense. And really, that's the easiest way to say it in layman's terms. How about you guys? How would you define trauma?
Yeah, I actually love Dr. van der Kolk. He's one of the pioneers in the trauma research. I like his definition too, and it's really shocking, similar to the APA, but it's really anything out of the ordinary that leaves someone feeling powerless. So really, it's a lot of times about perception of Jeff and I could both be in a car accident, and what happens in that car accident and our perceptions of that car accident can leave one of us feeling traumatized by it, and the other one, and having even PTSD, the other one being able to recover pretty quickly, and it might maybe not as traumatizing because it doesn't leave us feeling powerless. It is traumatic in and of itself, but the layers of effect are based on a lot of factors that we're going to talk about more. But anything out of the ordinary, which pretty much names a lot of things, Michelle.
Well, I think even to add to what you just said, Terra, is that even in our field, we talk about little t trauma and big T trauma. So that little t trauma might be something that's non-catastrophic or life-threatening, but still significant. And then big T trauma tends to be more life-threatening, life-altering. And again, people understand that response gets stored in our nervous system. And so our bodies, as Bessel van der Kolk says, he's someone that we all respect and trust as a leader in post-traumatic stress disorder, talks about how the body never lies. The way I say it is the body speaks in the only language it has. And so oftentimes when our heart is racing and our muscles are tense and we're sweating or hyperventilating, that's our body's way of saying, I'm experiencing this in a significant way in my body. And it's so important that we never say to someone, as you just said, that might say we went through the same experience and have a different response of, you're just too sensitive, or you're making a mountain out of a molehill. We cannot control how our body responds, right?
Yeah, that's a good point. And oftentimes we'll find in our leadership circles that people generally, first of all, I mean, our experience is over the last couple decades is that we've seen leaders come to that space where most high capacity leaders have some significant trauma earlier on in their journey. It's an interesting thing we've been observing and experiencing with the folks that come through our doors and our circles of influence. Generally speaking, people respond one of two ways. They take an approach to traumatic experiences, either the victim approach or in the achiever kind of overcoming a space. And it's an interesting thing that it generally happens that it's an either or. Sometimes, though, people actually in different environments can wear both hats, if you will. They can be the victim at home, and they can be the overcomer, achiever in the workspace. It's an interesting dynamic as a response to trauma. And if that doesn't get addressed, it doesn't go away, right?
Exactly. In fact, I remember being in graduate school and being in a class. I went to school in Portland, Oregon at Lewis and Clark, and there was about 15 in our class. They kept the classes small. And I turned to a colleague and said, who in here would you go to for therapy? And she looked around the room, took her about 5 minutes, really considering my question, and said, not a one of them. And I think sometimes people go into this field or maybe go into a leadership role, as you said, Jeff, maybe to unintentionally do some of their own work. So they're giving out maybe truth or data and help, but maybe they don't know how to apply it to their own story. Do you guys find that?
All the time. And I think it's part of just being a healthy, wholehearted leader. We really have to be willing to look at that part of our journey. I think the other thing is, as we talk about trauma being stored in the body, it's a body response. there's a grooming process that happens if we're not processing our trauma along the way as children. We grow up in very intense, maybe it's divorce or an alcoholic home, or we're high performer, very image-based family, and there's just no room for dealing with our emotions or our pain, dismissing medical needs. I mean, there's a lot of variety of things that we'll hear in our stories. That teaches us to dismiss our own needs, our own emotions, and we get a lot of practice. And then we become really great performers. Maybe you're the oldest child of 4 kids and you were able to take care of all 4 kids while mom and dad were working all these jobs, trying to pay the bills. And so now you're really good at coming to the rescue as a leader, and they get applauded along the way, as Jeff was saying. So the higher performers have the same kind of trauma, but their response is not victim, but it's coming to, I can be there. It's up to me. I can resolve this, because that's what we've learned and how we've responded to our trauma for so long.
Yeah, and I find that we, in America particularly, we like us some overcomer stories.
Yes, we do.
And we celebrate it as we even enter into
Yeah.
the political season here, not to get political, but it's just amazing how that script is played out. Everybody's looking for the great American story, if you will. And it's, we oftentimes think behind the scenes, I wonder what that family of origin was really like. Was it
Right.
like it's being told, and so on and so forth. So, leaders have this, high capacity leaders also have this tendency to dismiss trauma, to minimize it, because they're overcoming things, and that's been celebrated. And what is the past? We hear this all the time. What does the past have to do anything with the present? I'm moved on. I mean, let's think about the future. And we would say it has everything to do with the present and
Everything.
your future, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Just like a physical injury. If you
Yeah.
were in sports in high school and you bummed up your knees and you had surgery, torn your meniscus, and then here you are at 45 and you're experiencing that injury in a different way. Now you have to go back and say, this is where it started, and I have to attend to it today. In fact, a way that I love saying it to my clients is that on a scale of 0 to 10, if you hit an emotional response that's an 8, 9, or 10, it's always your own stuff. It's easy to say it's my kids, it's my job, it's that driver on the road. But you got to tend to your own stuff. And when you hit a big number real quick, another kind of picture you might like, those of you that are listening, is that if you walk into a house and you flip the light switch on, it's hardwired behind the wall long before that moment. But when you have that flipping of the switch on in your own response, it's your own stuff. And here's what's interesting to you guys. You know this part of my story, but I'm a pastor's kid. My dad was a conservative Baptist pastor for 20 years. I started in Christian schools at 4th grade. I said yes to Jesus when I was 6. So I've been all in for him. So I've loved the word. I've loved Jesus. I was always in ministry. I was one of those first to be at church, last to turn the lights out kind of kid. Part of it was being in a pastor's family. Some of it was just me loving people, loving stories. That's where you have the best talks, right at the end of the day. And yet what I found is that after high school, when I went to Bible college, so again, I love the Lord, I love the word, I love ministry, but no one, and you guys underscore that, I am not kidding you, no one talked about an inner world. I had no idea I had stuff. I had no idea what I would have done with the stuff, even if I was in touch with it. And I thought that memorizing scripture and being in ministry would have taken care of that. Yeah, what do you do though? And I would say, what would I do when I was so afraid through so much of my life and I couldn't go to camp because I thought something would happen to my parents, or I had such intense fears that I couldn't go to sleep at night. And I was truthfully afraid of guys dating and getting too close or it getting too physical. So I would just stay away because I wanted to be all in for Jesus. But no one told me what to do with what was really going on under the hood of my car. And I think, are you guys saying that's not an uncommon story for what you hear?
Yeah, well, I think there's a lot of contributing factors to that. Part of that is the church at large. We just haven't done a good job of understanding. Doesn't mean every Christian home has been this way, but Christian homes that have over-spiritualized, very human things that God designed, our emotions, our changing bodies, hormones, natural attraction stuff, sexuality. we haven't created margin or space for that. And you see that in church history throughout in lots of different denominations. So thank you for sharing that even from your own story. We have Western culture that's very focused on outward performance and outward look, and not, there's some Eastern cultures that are more internal and paying attention more to the body, but Western culture has not known to do that. So put that together with the church and then the family systems. If we didn't grow up in homes, old school parenting was beat your children, don't talk, be silent until spoken to. There's a lot of the disciplining and separation and not a lot of engagement between adults and children. So we have cultural pieces playing a role. There's a lot of factors for each person's story. Yes. And I think it's just slowing down enough to say, God wants to go there with us. He's not afraid of it. And it's okay to recognize.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, it's okay to recognize that when the light goes on, it's a cue, you're saying, and we can actually see some things if we pay attention when that switch gets turned off, and to try to be curious about what's under the hood, to use the language you're talking about. So,
yeah, we're talking about, I think, in some respects, this natural segue into triggers. So when we think about when something's happening and you go to an 8 to 10, like you're saying, and Michelle, you're counseling people to say, that's actually kind of more your stuff. We need to explore this. But there was an environmental circumstance that sort of got that switch to flip. Talk about triggers, Michelle. What are they? How do we heal from them? And both you and Terra, mentioned that trauma's in the brain. It's and that just praying or memorizing scripture doesn't really get to trauma in the same way as typical loss or grief or bad days. Other things can kind of take us there. Talk about triggers. What are they? How do we heal from them?
Some people would say that a trigger is just a response to a stressor. It's like you just get activated. You kind of feel like something nudged you or jerked you or hit you. And you go, whoa, that, and you guys, I've had it this week. I'm like, okay, that was an overreaction. I was just super rude. Of course, it's always to the people closest to me. And I'm like, okay, what's really going on? In fact, I love, speaking to men, and I'm like, picture your car. If a light on the dashboard comes on, you don't get out a hammer and just say, I hate lights coming on my car. I'm going to, I'm going to beat it with the hammer till it goes out, or I'm going to pull over and disconnect the wires. No, you say, that's alerting me that if I ignore this, that's the trigger. If I ignore this, I'm going to have a worse problem later on. So I need to pull my car over, lift the hood up, look at the wiring and say, what's going on here? So a trigger, again, just an activating response that's letting you know something under the hood that's really worth paying attention to is going on. And when you hit that 8, 9, or 10, if you can tune into what's going on, which means pull your car over, get away from people, you can pray, you can journal, you can think, you can ponder and say, what's actually going on? Because another way I love to say it is that the thing you think is the thing isn't the thing. Most of the time, the thing you think is the thing isn't the thing, right? And you might have a sight, a sound, a smell, a taste, a touch that's activating in your sensory system some former memory. In fact, you guys, I remember years ago having a client who had been raped, and here she was reliving this trauma, and her husband was trying to tell her, I'm here for you. You can trust me. I'm vetted. And she just couldn't let her husband close. And I remember asking her a question, which I always say the mighty counselor makes me sound way better than I am in my profession, because he tells me what to ask or say oftentimes. And I just said, what was he wearing? And she said, oh my goodness, I've never put that together. He had on a flannel plaid shirt. And she turned to her husband and said, you have a bunch of flannel shirts, and I'll just turn into this rude, aggressive woman that I don't want to be, but I never knew why. Mm-hmm. But see, she was being triggered and activated. The thing she thought was the thing wasn't the thing. She thought it was her husband, but it was what he was wearing. So if we can become, as you said, Terra, more curious and ask ourselves, I wonder what's going on. In fact, I love the book by Dr. Bruce Perry and Oprah Winfrey called What Happened to You? If we could begin asking the question, what happened right now when I said that? Seemed like you hit a big number. or you with the person that you're with, ask, what number did you just hit? 0 to 10. It kind of helps depersonalize it. And then we're not saying, what is wrong with you? It's
what's wrong
what
with
happened.
me?
Yeah, or what's wrong with me? Exactly.
Yeah, I love it. So 2 analogies. These are such great word pictures, but the triggers are like little children, and I always think about if you don't pay attention to them. So when you have a little 4-year-old who drew a picture, scribbled all kinds of things and come running over you, mommy, 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 mommy. So if you don't pay attention and look at them and get down and look at it and engage and look them in the eye and try to understand where they're coming from, they're going to get louder and more obnoxious. And eventually, sometimes children will actually shut off. They'll stop engaging you and wanting to show you their pictures. Like emotions and like those triggers, sometimes people go numb, like nothing in the world. So you get the activation side, and then you also get the dissociating side of things with trauma, where it just, nothing has color, nothing engages you anymore because you've been ignoring them too long. So the body has all kinds of responses. The other piece is that trauma is stored in that downstairs brain, that emotional part of the brain that's with us from day one, when we're babies, all the way till the day we die. And that's a sensory oriented part of the brain. So it's always what we see, what we smell, what we hear, what we taste, what we feel. So seeing that flannel was stored in that downstairs brain for her. Logically, she wasn't thinking about that, but that emotional brain had kept that memory. And that's where trauma gets stored, because everything's sensory oriented. It doesn't make sense always logically, but when we go, oh, your senses mapped that out as danger, danger, danger. And it's God's provision for us. It's a way for us to be protected in time. But when it's being used in the places it's not supposed to be, if we're in war, you want your responses to work there. But when you're back at home and not in war and your body's still reacting, we don't want to be engaging our spouses that way. So it's so important to understand that this is normal to have triggers. It's normal to have trauma in a broken, fallen world. What's unhealthy is when we ignore it or push it away. So let's talk about, how do we help this? How do we actually heal from some of these traumas and these triggers? Jeff, what's some of the things you want to say to that?
Well, you guys hit the nail on the head, Michelle, when you use the word curious. So I think you have to have an interest. You have to, sometimes pain brings things out to a point where you begin to look, and to wonder, or to begin to engage in curiosity. And it's just different for every person, but there needs to be, you don't have to wait until there's a breaking point. You can start attuning earlier to smaller signs. Which is the goal. But if you're already in a space where you run at a high clip and you're living at 8 out of 10, which a lot of people in our world do, and they just think, they oftentimes will underreport or give themselves a much lower number, even though their body is, and their body language is reporting an 8 or a 9. They'll say, I'm a 4. And they just live in there all the time. So that's another issue. But staying curious, I would say, being open to feedback from people that are in a small, close circle is really kind of key. We talk about the people that are in our closest circles, giving us feedback, and just like you, Michelle, I could have an overreaction to somebody that's sitting right next to me, and go, "Oh my gosh, that was way over the top for whatever was coming at me, stimulus wise. What's going on inside of me?" And you should be like, "Yeah, go figure that out." And we have to stay curious. We have to take some time to observe or to explore. We need to lean into people that we trust, that can give us sound feedback, or to join us in that process. When you're vulnerable, and I'm like in a Bible study this morning with guys, and we're talking about some of the challenges that we're experiencing in our lives at home or at work. When we are vulnerable with others, we're experiencing something. There's some changes that are happening here, and that you guys both know about from a neuroscience background. You have to experience things in order to heal from things. It's not just talk, but it's vulnerability with other humans. And so that'd be something that I just benefited from this morning at the roundtable of fellas.
Well, and because we hurt within the context of relationship, and we heal within the context of relationship, and we know that most trauma is interpersonal, it's relational, it's between people, and then we want to go to fight or flight or freeze or even faint, fawn, that whole shutting down submissive piece where we have this reaction. It's so hard to lean in and be vulnerable. It's like, no, my brain says, don't trust again, build a wall. And yet I love how you said, Jeff, you're with a group of men who are intentionally leaning into vulnerability. I often encourage dads with daughters, lean into vulnerability. Start with you. Are you modeling what you want to see her do? But it's so hard to trust again. And I think if, we're talking about vulnerability, I'll just share here that I have a pretty extensive trauma story. And I have a lot of violation, a lot of sexual assault violation from men. And oh my goodness, to know most of that was within my family system, back mostly in my mom's family, and predominantly a grandfather, her dad, who molested me and others. And I didn't even realize through Bible college how much that was shaping my responses to not wanting to get close to guys. I wanted to be married, thought I'd get that MRS degree, but then there was a deeper fear that was limiting me. And where I have found so much healing in my story is that I trusted someone to lead me into places I couldn't go myself. So because we heal within the context of relationship, I would say especially to those leaders listening, and like you said, Terra, we're all leaders in some way, shape, or form, whether we're a parent, whether we're working, whether we're in ministry, running an organization. And I think it's really healthy, I'll put it in a positive way, to have someone that we let lead us into the scary places inside where oftentimes it's our inner child, our little child inside that's leading. In a way, they get into the driver's seat and take the steering wheel. And by trusting someone to walk with us, that's what happened for me, is that at about 28 years old, even though I was a worship leader and in youth ministry, and I'm a Bible college grad, and I am a pastor's daughter, and I'm thinking I should be able to handle this. I should know how to run to Jesus. But I invited a counselor to walk with me, and she would ask me over and over, oh my goodness, this brings up emotion. She says, where's Jesus in your story? And you guys, in Bible college, no one taught me that. As simple as that is the most important question you can ask yourself, or if you're leading your kids or leading someone else, is where's Jesus in that memory that's coming up to be healed? That's how my former mentor, a trauma expert in the field, Dr. James Friesen, would say. He'd always ask his clients, just where's Jesus in your story? And I used to believe Jesus didn't show up to dark places like I was reliving. Again, I'm not trying to diss on Bible college, but I never heard that in a sermon. I never heard that in Bible college. So I didn't know how to bridge the truth I learned in my head down into my heart place where I was hurting and reacting and getting triggered and re-experiencing trauma. And when she began to teach me how to, quote unquote, see Jesus there, you guys have heard this from my heart to yours, but one day, I don't know why it was different than any other, I literally, for the first time, felt like blinders came off. And I saw Jesus standing there with tears coming down his cheeks, stroking my hair, going with me through the valley of the shadow of death. He didn't keep me from it, but he walked with me through it. And I remember years later saying, when one day I heard God's voice, that's been a powerful part of my healing, is to learn to hear God's voice. Because John 10 says, my sheep know me. They hear my voice. And I think sometimes we think, I don't know if that was my thought or if that was Jesus talking. Well, usually it's not going to be what you were just thinking. And it comes fast. It always lines up with the word of God. That's how you know it's Jesus. And when Jesus came into that story for me, but it changed everything. And going with that is, one day I was driving down the road and I heard him say, I know you've always struggled with believing that I wasn't there. And I'm like, yeah, you were there after to give me a robe of righteousness and give me truth. But he said, you've been stuck on the verse in Psalm 91. No harm will come near your dwelling. You guys know that one?
Yes.
Right? We love that verse. Psalm 91.
Yes, we do. We love it.
And I used to get, I can get kind of snarky because I'm my authentic self, right? I live in Arkansas now is what I call this. I got that personality type, And And so again, God made me this way. So I come to him in that authentic, we're talking about being real interpersonally to heal. So that's got to include the Trinity, right? So I come and I'm like, yeah, if this is your version of no harm coming to my dwelling, I'd sure hate to see what your version of harm looks like. That's what I would say to God. And he's like, I've heard you. And he said, where do I dwell? He asked me that question because no harm will come near your dwelling. And I said, well, you dwell in my spirit. And he said, exactly. They got your body. They got your soul, which is mind, will, emotions, but they never touched your spirit. The place where I indwell you in your spirit is intact. And you guys, it flipped it around for me. It's like my spirit can help feed and lead my body, my soul. But I found that integrative and integrated kind of processing where I did listen to my body. I did tune into my body. I had an eating disorder through most of my 20s, looking at what my body was telling me. There's stuff not okay. And I invited Jesus by a counselor helping me ask that question, where's Jesus in your story? And then letting his truth come into the lies I believed. You mean I'm not a fat pig and a slob? I feel like I'm a piece of trash. He's like, no, I'm in your story. I see you as my beloved. What? There's no way. And just having him work it through with me has brought so much healing. And that's what I encourage grandparents and parents and leaders to always ask someone, what happened to you? Where is Jesus in your story? And what is he saying or giving you right now as truth to counter the lies? And that's how so much healing has come into my life. And it's now an honor to have a front row seat to seeing that same God show up for people that come and share their stories with me.
Thank you for sharing that, Michelle, and just the vulnerability of your own story, knowing the work that you've done with so many other trauma survivors and restoring relationship with God and others and between dads and daughters and your own journey. That's where it comes from. Those of us who have been in those dark, dark places and have seen what God can do in the healing process have no fear in doing that with others. And so that's the beauty of being a trauma survivor. But it does make me think, Michelle, as I sit with so many in that process of where were you, God? How did you let this happen to me or my children or to my, those I loved? The why, and it's can be a part of the process too. Is leaving room, finding someone that lets you question, lets you move through, because trauma infiltrates into all the areas of our life: how we view ourselves, how we view God, how we view the scriptures, how we view parenting, how we view our spouses and relationships, our sexuality. There's a lot that we have to take time with. And so I'm hearing that key both of you are talking to is we have to have safe people. And I always remind people that it's slow. Trauma is fast. Abuse particularly is all about you have no voice, you have no choice, and what you want and need doesn't matter. So the reverse of that, of our God who is patient and is slow to anger and quick to love us, but is slow and patient with our process. It's a grace-filled process. We've got to find people who are willing to go that slow pace with us and with those that we're with.
I love that you brought that up, because it's like, that's exactly the question I would always ask my therapist is, when am I going to be done?
Yeah.
I'm a firstborn. I am that perfectionist you talk like, I just want to be done. And I used to say this is a finite amount of trauma because, okay, here's where I was born and I'm not in a traumatic, experience today. So this is finite. I will get through this. But I would say, when will we be done? You know what she would say? This is brilliant. We'll be done when we get there.
Which is like, so for a firstborn type A, that does not resonate.
Yes,
but I loved it. It was truth.
So when we're talking about trauma, that's one of the key pieces for people to understand. And maybe even, I'm going to throw a little plug in here for us, Michelle, is, everybody wants a quick fix, especially in Western culture. Like, what can you do in 6 sessions? Well, right. I can pluck some weeds, We can maybe get you a little aware.
Yeah.
But it actually is traumatic to do anything fast, and it isn't healthy. I would say to question, don't trust anybody who sells you something quick and easy and fast. So when you're looking for safe and trusted counselors and coaches and processes, even in the church, we'll say, oh goodness, you went through that class, that 6-week class that changed your life, and now you're done because of Jesus. And I'm like, yes, Jesus is a part of the process, but God
Right.
has more for you. And it's okay that you're still not one and done. And I think thinking about church culture, sometimes we can heap more shame on people because it takes so much time, and God's not impatient with that. And those who are safe to come alongside you, friends, mentors, counselors, know that it's okay. Be where you are. And there's a process that takes, depending on the severity of the trauma, big T, little t, it can take longer.
I mean, how about for you guys? I mean, how, Sarah, I know that Jeff, you just talked a little bit about kind of some things you have found that help people with trauma be curious, walk with someone else. How about you, Terra? What have you found? You've shared some of it. Any other thoughts about how to lead people through, their journey to healing, I guess you could say?
Yeah, I think the last thing that none of us have talked about yet is just expressive types of therapy. Because we're dealing with the downstairs part of the brain and the body kind of working from, we call it the body up work versus top down. Top down is cognitive, like your belief systems and trying to really tackle those lies. Bottom up are those triggers. It's expressive types of therapy. So using like EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization treatment, finding therapists who understand how to do that kind of expressive work, even doing things like martial arts and dance and equine therapy or horse therapy, like doing things, art, coloring, music, things that are very much using and engaging the body are going to be a part of that healing process. And so that is something that is something we do in terms of our holistic approach. It's not just learning something from an information standpoint. It's actually shifting and changing into more of an expressive model.
And even springboarding off of that, Terra, what I love teaching people, and those listening, you could just put this into action today. I love action steps, is that this idea of eye movement, desensitization and reprocessing, which Terra and I are both trained in, it's about eye movement, which REM sleep, right? Rapid eye movement is where our eyes are going back and forth, processing things in the night. And so this is about helping to activate processing in the day rather than waiting till you get to sleep and have nightmares, is any what's called bilateral stimulation, right, left, is going to help you process. So if you have a big response, I love doing training in EMDR for children, even though, because I think we're all big kids, is lace your fingers together. It's called a ladybug hug. And you put, one hand goes up, then goes down, then the other fingers go up, then down. Or you can cross your arms like a butterfly. They call that butterfly hug, right, left, right, left. You can tap on your knees back and forth, helping to lower that activated arousal system in your body before you can pray. That's what I found a lot of times. I had so much fear in my body. I'm trying to quote a verse or trying to pray, but I couldn't calm myself first.
Right.
And I find that it's so helpful to teach people how to regulate their body. And then we co-regulate with the person we're with breathing in. You can do slow breaths in, through your nose, 4 in, 6 out through your mouth, kind of calming your own system so that you don't have to feel that you can't have mastery. You can have mastery with your body, what it's doing, that can build some confidence instead of a reenactment of going hyperventilation or whatever. I mean, I'll even throw out another idea. I know Terra and I love giving people practical ways. Jeff does too, of course, but it's just 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And you use your senses. If you're triggered, as 5 things I can see right now. You can do any order. Maybe 4 things I can touch. Then 3 things I can smell. 2 things, I can hear. And I always end with 1. I usually don't do taste, but you can do it if you want. But either 1 thing I'm grateful for or 1 thing I'm proud of. And it kind of takes the bigness of being out of control, and you kind of bring your focus down into more of a focused 1 place. And that might be something practical for those listening that go, okay, I don't know that I'm ready for a counselor, but I want to tune into triggers and get more grounding when I'm activating trauma.
I'll just say this, that I mean, having been not being a licensed clinician, but being married to one, when I learned grounding skills and I began to do body work to try to understand what's going on better, be more in attune with my own body so that I could actually help others that are like me in the coaching space. I latched on to five senses, and I latched on to also the tapping piece. But I those are my go-to. I teach those to others when they come into session, even into coaching sessions. If I see them amped up, I'll talk with them about their number and teach them how to take the pulse and how they can slip away and just take 2 to 3 minutes to ground themselves before they go to speak or to go present and this around the table or to have this difficult conversation that's coming up. It is so practical. And so if you're listening out there and you are a lay person, you're not in the clinical world, glean from the wisdom of the clinical world from Dr. Michelle and Terra here, and apply grounding exercises, if you will, if you need help with anxiety and or you're at high levels of stress all the time. Get in touch with that before it's too late, before it's you're burned out and your body shuts down, because that's exactly what happens ultimately.
And I would just say that trauma, we'll end with this before you can learn more about our resources, but trauma is like plaque, like it builds over time if we don't clean it out. And so we can regulate in the moment, but it's temporary. So when we take our deep breaths or we do our five senses, we teach our kids how to do this. These are tools that we give in all of our resources, but it's temporary, kind of like brushing your teeth. You can brush your teeth, but eventually you got to brush your teeth again. And then you need to go to the dentist and get them cleaned, like, deep plaque cleaned out. Otherwise, you can get all kinds of deeper problems, right?
And
the same is with trauma.
And somebody else has to do that. That's the hygienist.
Somebody else has to do that.
You can't get that part.
Yeah, I'm laughing because I'm using a dental analogy, and Dr. Michelle used to be a dental hygienist. I didn't realize that until this very moment.
And all of my family are dentists and dental hygienists too. So,
but it's a great reminder to not feel shame when you're like, why does this keep happening? It's because the plaque is building, and you're brushing your teeth with these momentary helps, which are helpful. But you got to do some plaque cleaning out, and you need somebody else to help you with that. We can't do this alone, and that is one of the key things I hope you're hearing today. So Dr. Michelle, talk about how everybody can find you and your resources. You are just full of wisdom and expertise and in lots of different ways. So tell us where people can find you today.
Sure. You can go to drmichellewatson.com, Dr. DrMichelle Watson.com. Free resources like link to my podcast, to the books. And then every other week I write a Dad-Daughter Friday blog. And really, my clinical work in terms of my counseling practice, which has been now almost 3 decades, is not just focused on dads, but a lot of the resources on my website are really about wanting to equip dads to dial in to their daughter's heart space, which means being more attuned to their triggers and to their traumatic events, which then in the end helps dads grow too. And so I love resourcing dads that way. And then the Dad Whisperer podcast is on all platforms as well.
I love it. Okay, so Jeff, how can people find you?
No,
this is true. I'm asking you because people don't know where you are because you're not in the world out there publicly. But how can someone find you if they want to work with you?
I refer to Jeff. So yes, this is good.
Thank you, Michelle. Yes.
People want to know.
I've been doing these things called Reels lately, which our social media person is really proud of me because I'm doing them. livingwholehearted.com, our website, is where I primarily am found. People can email me at jeff@livingwholehearted.com as well. And you'll see us. I usually, I'm doing things in my own executive coaching, organizational development space with our team. We have a team of folks that are engaged in that. But I'm often found with you, which is wonderful. And Terra and I team together in a number of different ways through the Dear Matson's platform, our partners in Christian parenting, and a number of other vehicles. So
yeah. So thank you for doing that.
Oh, you're welcome. Yeah.
And now you, Terra, where can they find you?
Yeah, you can follow me at Terra Matson. I'm not really active on social media. The best places are Living Wholehearted and mycourageousgirls.com are places you could go to find resources. But overall, I am with Jeff. We're doing our wholehearted leadership cohorts. Those are my favorite, where I get to help with high capacity leaders in their home and in their work and in their communities and do the slow and steady work. And I'm integrating both this trauma trained clinical work that I've been doing the last 20 years over in the executive coaching. And so I love working particularly with women, but often Jeff and I will work with couples as well. So you can reach us, just livingwholehearted.com. And if you just want to be a part of our ongoing free resources, sign up for our newsletter and stay in touch with us here on the podcast. You've got incredible resources coming this summer and this fall, continuing to talk about the difference between healthy and wholehearted leadership and toxic leadership, both in and out of the church. So we're grateful you're with us. And until next week, we hope that you'll continue to grow to be the leader that you would follow.
This podcast is powered by Living Wholehearted, Courageous Girls, and the Christian Parenting Podcast Network. Thank you for joining us in this critical movement of shrinking our integrity gaps between what we preach and live.